Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa McAllister, and you're listening to the Melissa M.A.D.E Show. Now, for decades, I've dedicated myself to helping women break the cycle of dieting, navigate through all the fads, and change their lives through my nutrition coaching. Now, each week, I'm going to talk about everything from deep nutrition, mindset, self-care, the ideal workout routine, tips on how and why to implement intermittent fasting in your life, my favorite recipes that are not only crowd pleasers, but they're actually healthy for you, and so much more. Now, with small and consistent changes, you can defy aging while living a happier, healthier, and more heart-filled life. I'm so excited to show you it's possible with the right strategies that are so simple to adopt. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Melissa M.A.D.E Show. And I feel like I should start every episode with some sort of an apology. But this one is because when I get something going in my mind, and it's usually when I'm working out, that I'm like, ooh, I should get on here and I should talk about it. So I know the term dress for success, but if you're watching the videos instead of just the audio and you see me in workout clothes, I want to apologize, but it's just the way it's going to be. And if you're watching as well, you still see the great little scratches on my nose from our little raccoon that we're rehabilitating. The scratches seem to get worse before they get better. So I'm going into all these stores and I do get people looking at me a little bit longer and I'm always like, what? And then it dawns on me, well, you've got a couple big scratches across your nose. So, oh, well, today's episode, I want to talk about fat. And I'm not talking about the fat that's, visceral or subcutaneous fat, the fat that's on your body, but the fat that you eat. I don't know where you are on the spectrum right now. It's so funny because we've got people that eat and consume nothing but fat. And then we still have people that are on low fat diets. So there's just this huge spectrum. And I'm here to tell you, Mama's pretty much middle of the road when it comes to fat. But we have had such a fear of fat for at least the last 50 years because of misinformation. And I know it's a really hard it's so hard to break that. And not only that, but people are afraid that fat will make you fat. I was listening to a podcast and Sean Stevenson, I got to get him on here, was talking about eating fat will make you fat just as much as eating blueberries will make you blue. And I was like, yes, that is so true. We need fat, and we need fat for so many different reasons. It is without fat, we can absorb those fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. And we know right now how especially important having vitamin D in our diets, supplementing with vitamin D, because most people are not getting enough through sunlight, that we really need that. But if you're eating a very low diet and you're popping a vitamin D pill in the morning on an empty stomach without any fat whatsoever, your body has a really hard time utilizing that vitamin D. So we need to eat fat for that vitamin consumption. It's also really good for the brain. The brain loves to run on fat. It is very fat itself. And so eating fat helps keep the brain healthy. Believe it or not, it is really important in wound healing. It helps your blood clot. So A, D, E, and K, vitamin K is really important for blood clotting. And so you don't want to continuously bleed like I did with my nose. It actually clotted very fast. Come to think about it. I mean, I reached up and the second I touched my nose, there was a lot of blood, but by the time I got out of the cage, it was pretty much done. And I'm like, hey, it's pretty good. It's all the fat I'm eating. Fat also helps with hormone production, which we know right now, there are so many hormones that just seem a little bit out of whack. And if we're trying to eat a low-fat diet, our hormones actually really suffer because we're not getting enough of those healthy fats in our diet. And it's also a great source of energy. Some people fear fat because, yes, carbohydrates and proteins only give you 4 calories per gram, and fat gives you 9 calories per gram. But you have to understand it's very satiating. The body needs it, it uses it, and it makes food taste good. It makes food taste amazing. So if you just are, very careful with, sitting down, relaxing, and making an experience out of your meal, putting some grass-fed butter on some broccoli and having yourself maybe some air fried chicken or whatever you are, enjoy the experience, you can have a very satiating meal where you're going to walk away for several hours feeling full because you have that healthy fat in your diet. So of course, there are tons of different kinds of fat out there. Funny story. I remember when I was dating my husband many, many moons ago, and his neighbor, they had a little boy who would always steal the butter out of the refrigerator, the stick of butter, and would eat the stick of butter. Back then, I mean, still to this day, please, no one needs to eat that much butter. Let's just say 2 tablespoons max is all you really need. But back then I was just like, oh my gosh, these parents, they shouldn't even have butter in the house. Why don't they have margarine? I was one of those people who were duped into believing that margarine was good. And I told this story on a podcast that I was a guest on not too long ago, that it was my husband that would never touch margarine. He goes, it's not natural. It tastes like a chemical. He says, why wouldn't I eat the real thing? And we kind of battled that for a while until I learned better. And he probably won't listen to these podcasts, so I don't have to admit that he was right, but he was. He's always been a better eater than me when it comes to reaching for those more natural foods than anything that's not. And for him, it's not science, it's not health, it's for taste. He really likes the taste of real food versus all of these, processed and ultra processed foods that are out there that pretend to be real food like margarine, but it's really not. So first, let's talk about, speaking of margarine, trans fat. Trans fat, you really want to ward off at every cost. It's just not something you want in your diet. You want to be healthy, you want to avoid trans fat. Trans fat is margarine. So trans fat makes, a liquid fat solid. And so that's where that comes from. And I just want you to be careful, because a lot of, especially ultra processed foods, it will say 0 trans fat, but there's an error of margin of error in there, where I think it's 0.5% can still be in there, and you don't know it because it's going to say 0. So they say if it's less than 1%, it can say 0 when it still has 0.5. And let's be honest, almost every single thing that you would eat possibly that has trans fat in it, you're going to have more than one serving. 12 chips, maybe. I don't think so. Not even me. Even one of those single bags is not a single serving. It's a good 3 servings. So you're getting 1.5, grams possibly of trans fat in there, thinking you're not getting anything. And it's really something we should avoid. The next one is monosaturated fat, which has been known to lower your LDL cholesterol, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. It's liquid. So think of something like olive oil or avocados, obviously what you would probably right now consider a health food. Polyunsaturated, we can't make it ourselves. It's usually omega-3s, and you can get it from things like salmon, which I just had for lunch today, and walnuts are really good sources of polyunsaturated fats. And then saturated fats or saturated animal products. So you think meat and eggs, and still to this day, people fear saturated fat. And I just want to let you know that the USDA, which just like the FDA, they've, kind of gone up to the point that they say that you can have up to 35% of your calories come from fat. When I know, and I don't know when this happened, could have been 2016, could have been more recent, but changing that, because they realize that, fat isn't bad. We actually need fat in our diet. So they just kind of quietly increased the amount of fat that they said that we can have in our diet. There's not near as much money to be made on fat as there are carbohydrates, processed and ultra processed carbohydrates. So it was quiet, but it's true that they even say that you can have up to 35% fat in your diet and be healthy. Now, I want to talk to you about the Mediterranean diet, which is touted as the healthiest diet in the world, because most people who live in the blue zones eat a more Mediterranean type diet. And the Mediterranean diet is about 35 to 40% fat. Now, it's careful fat. Keep that in mind. They're not having, they're not using canola oil. They're not using margarine. they're using the good stuff, but their fat content is a little bit higher. And the M.A.D.E diet, which is what I created, is very Mediterranean-esque, very similar to the Mediterranean, except that I go just a tad bit higher in fat usually, because most people, so people who are on the Mediterranean diet have eaten that way their whole life. It's their heritage. But for us, most people are coming from a standard American diet where the carbohydrates are really high, and they're very high in sugar, and they've created some insulin resistance. And so to get people to get more sensitive to that insulin again, instead of having them at the 35 to 40% fat, I bump it up just a little bit more, 45 to 50, so that we can lower the carbohydrates just a little bit, so that you become a little bit more insulin sensitive in that nature. And, I do believe when you have, a moderate amount of protein and a good amount of fat, you're more satiated as well. And it's going to help you calm those cravings for those starchy foods that you may have eaten in the past. So I always say that, and I put this in when I revise my book, that the M.A.D.E diet is really paleo and the Mediterranean diet got together and had a baby, because I'm just not personally, I've just seen too many people look and feel so much better without a lot of dairy and a lot of grains in their life, which, paleo people really, limit that as well. So just food for thought on there. But I have a couple studies that, as usual, I will put the links below to them, but things when I did my research that I just found fascinating. And I think you hearing it might help you go, oh, that is fascinating. And I encourage you always to do your own research and to dive into it further, because as I always say, you will find one study telling you one thing, and you might find another study telling you the exact opposite. And so when I do my research, I really try to look, I put in, do eggs cause heart disease? And then, I will look at everything, not just the first one that pops up and I'm like, ooh, that's going to support me. Even if there's one that I see that I'm like, oh, I need to read that one as well. I promise you I do. All of my books as well, like the China study, I studied that because it's not something that I'm like, really? But, I read up on it to understand, and it makes sense to me now. So just so you know that. But let's talk about the first one. So this one says, and I want to quote it, that consuming 2 eggs per day as compared to an oatmeal breakfast decreases plasma ghrelin, which is your hungry hormone. Okay, so when you get the sense of, I need food, I'm hungry, that's ghrelin, while maintaining the LDL HDL ratio. So I shouldn't have broke that up. Let me read it again. Consuming 2 eggs per day as compared to an oatmeal breakfast decreases plasma ghrelin while maintaining the LDL HDL ratio. That's good, because we hear, oatmeal is heart healthy. And I'm not saying that it's not. If you're going to have oatmeal, get yourself some steel cut or some rolled oats. Try not to do the instant oatmeal, because that's been processed a lot more, and it breaks down in the body faster and will spike your insulin or your glucose in your blood just a little bit faster. And so you love oatmeal. It can be a great part in your diet if you love it, but just really work for finding those steel cut or the rolled oats, so they just break down a little bit slower and you don't get such a rush. But this is saying that you can have 2 eggs per day, and it will decrease the hunger hormone more than having oatmeal, which is great. Now, I'm reading a book right now. This is an instance of me studying to test my own theories. And I'm reading a book right now from a gentleman, a very attractive gentleman, who's huge into the calorie deficit. Huge. That's all that matters. And in fact, he even, says that all intermittent fasting is, and the reason that it could work for weight loss is because it's a calorie deficit, which could absolutely be true. Could absolutely be true. But then you're forgetting the whole point of all the health benefits that come with, intermittent fasting versus eating right when you wake up to right when you go to bed. The difference of shortening that window versus eating all day long. You look at that kind of stuff. I'm looking at your stuff. You look at that kind of stuff is my mentality here. But he talks about leptin, which is your satiety hormone, and ghrelin, your hunger hormone. And, and I don't really understand in the book why he brings that up so much, except maybe that sounds horrible to say because he wants to sound smart. That's not what I mean, but maybe to just educate his people. But he makes it sound like it doesn't matter. Nothing matters but calories. And I'm here to tell you that, I read that and I was like, oh, interesting, because here's this study that says that if you eat eggs instead of oatmeal, you're going to help control that hormone ghrelin, and from you feeling more hungry after your breakfast. Okay. So to him, all that matters is how many calories you have. So you could have as many calories of eggs as you could have as many calories of oatmeal, and it doesn't matter. But it does. Foods react differently in the body. And so truly, if you want to lose fat, you do need to be in a deficit, but let's make it as less miserable as possible by really helping regulate those hormones with good quality, healthy food that's going to keep you from being ravenous because of that. So, they always say 100 calories of chips versus 100 calories of broccoli is 100 calories, but your body 100% utilizes it in different ways. And this is just proof that, think about that kind of thing. If you have healthy fats and healthy proteins in your breakfast versus oatmeal, which is really just carbohydrates and a good amount of fiber. That's why it's so heart healthy, is because it's got a really good amount of fiber in it. So have some fibrous vegetables with your eggs. You are so much better off when it comes to how hungry you're going to feel down the road after that breakfast. Okay. So let's talk about the next study that I found fascinating. And this one, this is one that I really want you to look in for, or to sit down with your doctor and talk to. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's just science that I don't think is shared enough. And it needs to be. One of the most common concerns I get from my following is they will tell me they went and they got their blood work done and their doctor said that their LDL was raised and they want to put them on a statin. What's my opinion? And I tread lightly. I tread very lightly. But it's studies like this that I want people to know about so that they have a little bit of empowerment to go back to that doctor and say, are you sure? Are you sure that a statin with just a slightly elevated LDL is the best thing for me? So let me read it. Saturated fat increases well-known heart disease risk factors, such as LDL cholesterol. So that's just saying that saturated fat has been known to raise LDL cholesterol. I don't think anybody would argue with you there. However, saturated fat intake tends to increase the amount of large, fluffy LDL particles, but decrease the amount of smaller, denser LDL particles that are linked to heart disease. So science is amazing. Research is amazing and always emerging. So, and if someone ever tells you science is constant, oh my goodness, it's not. Constantly changing. And so they have found that you just can't lump LDL particles together. There's different sizes. There's small, there's medium, there's large. And do these sizes mean anything? So this is what it's telling you. So where am I? Plus, research has demonstrated that certain types of saturated fat may increase heart protective HDL cholesterol. What? Research have demonstrated that certain types of saturated fat, that bad word, saturated fat, may increase heart protective HDL cholesterol. So what I want you to take from that is if you change your diet slightly and you get rid of the seed oils or, the soybean oils and the corn oils out of your diet, and you put in some good, healthy olive oils and coconut oils and, stuff like that, but you still, have your saturated fat, which could be coconut oil, and, butter and stuff like that, and tallow and ghee and all that. And then you go and get your blood work done and maybe, most likely your HDL might raise, but also your LDL might go up a little bit. And all I want you to do is to ask your doctor if they did a particle size test. And if they didn't, ask them if they will. Before they come to the conclusion of you need to be on a statin, let's find out if those LDL particles are harmful to you or not. Now I had this, and I might I should have looked this up. I might screw this up a little bit, but someone mentioned once that if you think about it, so the LDL particles, the big fluffy ones they're buoyant and they're bouncy and they kind of just move through your veins and your arteries, just bouncing around, where the small dense ones, don't so much. It's like a marble versus like a big beach ball, and they kind of stick to the edges of the artery and the veins. And if there's any kind of a nick, which happens, and I believe that, there are certain foods that can really damage, obviously, the arterial walls and stuff like that. And those little tiny ones are the ones that get stuck. And that's what causes, artery clog up and stuff. That comes from those unhealthy oils that you're getting. And believe it or not, sugar also plays a role in that. Having too much sugar and not having good quality, nature-made, God-made, however you want to see it, foods in your diet, and instead these factory and man-made foods. So particle size test. Okay. So let me see. Do I have one more? Margarine and certain vegetable oils, including canola and soybean oil, are high in omega-6 fats. So you're going to hear all the time about omega-3 and omega-6. And they're both good for you. We've kind of gotten to the point where we hear omega-6 and we think, ooh, that's bad, but it's not. We actually need both. You need omega-3 and you need omega-6. But our ratios, because of our process and our the ultra processed foods that are out there right now, they use a lot more of these omega-6s because they're cheaper. And so Americans are getting closer to like 1 to 20 of omega-3 to omega-6, when it really should be 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 3. That ratio, you still need more omega-6 than you do 3, but we have exasperated that. And we get so much more that it causes an inflammatory response in the body because it's so out of whack. That's my husband, if you're watching the video, on his dirt bike. So my husband has been, when I met him, he was, racing professionally. And so I've grown up with him and motors. So you'll always hear these analogies from me. And I hope they make sense to you, but they totally make sense to me. And plus I want to impress my husband, which he won't watch this, so it doesn't really matter. But a 2-stroke engine needs a mixture of both oil and gas. And that mixture has to be perfect. If you have too much of one or too much of the other, that engine is not going to run at all, or it's going to seize, or you're just going to have problems with it. And our bodies are exactly the same way. We need both the omega-6 and the 3, but we really need to balance out the ratio of those two. And that really goes back to having natural fats and eating a whole food diet. And it will absolutely correct itself, but try not to eat those processed foods because those omega-6s will still sneak in, and you will always have that inflammation throughout the body because of that high amount of omega-6. Okay, so another study for you. A higher omega-6 to omega-3 ratio has been associated with health conditions like mood disorders, obesity. So there we go again. It's not just calories in and calories out. If you have a real influx of omega-6 to omega-3, studies have shown that it contributes to obesity, calories aside. The imbalances between omega-6 and omega-3 fat intake have been linked to increased inflammation and the development of adverse health conditions, mood disorders, obesity, insulin resistance, increased heart disease risk factors, and mental decline. Okay, those are pretty serious, just because, so if you're just alone counting macros, you won't pay attention to how many omega-6s you're getting versus how many omega-3s you're getting, right? Because it's just macros. Fat is fat. Just like carbohydrates are carbohydrates. You eat some Skittles or you eat some green beans, they're carbs. It doesn't matter. Ooh, it matters. It matters so much that it can make a difference in your mood, your obesity, your insulin resistance, heart disease risk factors, and mental decline. We got to eat better. Okay, so that study will also be down below. And last one I want to talk about before I let you go is research observes that replacing saturated fat with omega-6 rich fats is unlikely to reduce heart disease and may even increase the risk of heart disease related mortality. I'm going to say it one more time. Research observes that replacing saturated fat with omega-6 rich fat. So, if someone has told you to get rid of saturated fat out of your diet, I'm going to use a vegan as an example. I love you. I'm not saying your diet is bad whatsoever, but a lot of times a vegan will, because saturated fat comes from animal protein, they will switch then to, canola oil or corn oil because it's vegan. Okay. So I'm just using that as an example for that in particular. So when a vegan decides to go vegan, they're going to pull out that saturated fat and replace it with omega-6. But the study is saying that it is unlikely to reduce heart disease, even though you will see on vegetable oil that it's heart healthy. Anyway, I need to slap this study on every single bottle when I go to the store. It's unlikely to reduce heart disease by switching to omega-6 fats, and it may even increase the risk of heart disease related mortality. So I'm just going to go all the way back to the fact that what I want from you guys most is, remember, I should always ask this at the end of every podcast. What do I want most from you? I don't want you to eat right before you go to bed. That's probably the most important thing. I want to help remind you. Well, I want you to take a nice deep breath every day. I want you to sit up nice and tall. I want you to get your sleep. I want you to stay hydrated. There's a lot of things I want you to do, but I definitely want you to get out of the habit of eating right before you go to bed. Give your body that chance to take care of itself. It's the whole point of sleeping. Not only that, but to really, say for 2022, you are going to really concentrate on eating whole foods. Can you imagine if you were to just really pull back on the amount of foods that you bought that was in packaging? And I'm not talking like you could get a package of broccoli, that's cool, but the packaging that, where it has an ingredient list and it's pretty lengthy, but just going back to whole foods. I love the term single ingredient foods. Last night for dinner, this is how I eat. We took two, I guess whole chicken legs that had the thigh and the leg. Took two of those. I spritzed them with some olive oil and put some 2-2 seasoning on them and put them in the air fryer. What else did we have? Just a huge mixed vegetable thing. All of this stuff is on my Instagram. I always show how I make these kind of things. And I put them in the cast iron I spritz it with olive oil. I'm going to end this by saying that, people are always like, well, some healthier oils, which ones do I cook with? Which, things like tallow and ghee and these that have a higher smoke point, which mean that you can put them at a higher temperature. If you see your oil smoking, that's not good. That's not what you want because it oxidizes when that happens. But when you're like, I'll spritz the vegetables and the olive oil will kind of absorb into the vegetables. And that's different than actually sauteing in it. If I was going to saute something, I would use butter or ghee or, avocado oil or something like that instead. So keep that in mind. So when I say that I spritz it with olive oil, the olive oil isn't sitting on the hot pan. It's kind of absorbed into the vegetables and it's really not that much. My little spray bottle, that is an Evo spray bottle, 13 squirts is a tablespoon. And so I'm making a very large vegetable serving for Mick and I won't maybe use 2 tablespoons. My cast iron is seasoned very well just because it's as old can be. I can't take credit for seasoning it well. It's just an amazing cast iron because I use it every single day. And I use 2 tablespoons of oil for these vegetables to help me absorb those healthy vitamins like we talked about in the beginning, right? And that's it. It was a beautiful piece of chicken. It was crispy because it was the air fryer, so it tasted like fried chicken. And then this rainbow of vegetables. And I will put the seasoning in it. I'll put finish it with a little tiny bit of toasted sesame oil. And sometimes we put a splash of balsamic vinegar in it, which might sound funny to you, but give it a try. It just gives it a real caramelized flavor. It's heaven, and it's single ingredient foods. And it's a huge variety. I'm getting all the fiber I need, all the the antioxidants and vitamins and minerals and protein and healthy fats all in that meal. And I might have finished it off with a little piece of dark chocolate, maybe. But anyway, as I was coming on to do this podcast, I realized the last time that I did my podcast, I ended up with saying, I hope you guys have a great day. I mean, like I was ending a webinar with you, like you and I were actually talking. So I want your help. Down below in the comments, I kind of need a tagline to finish. You know, what do I say at the end? Arrivederci? I want your help. I want to know what I should say. Those of you that know me and have been following me for a long time, give me a tagline. I might fall in love with it and I might use it from here on out, but I do need help there. And I would love for you to tell me what I should say instead of just coming up with something myself. I want your help. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I hope you have a great day. Wow, we've reached the end. But before I leave you, I'd love to hear from you. After all, it's not every day that someone reaches out and asks for your opinion. And to me, your opinion does matter. So please share this episode with anyone that you think needs to hear this message. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. My name is Melissa McAllister. And until next time, thank you for being your own health advocate.